Morning, everyone. It's 11:01 Eastern Time. For those of you who are logging on right on time, we're just going to wait a few minutes for people in the queue to get logged in before we start. But if you are looking for the webinar today, hosted by Webair, Veeam's partner Webair, how to get your backups offsite with Veeam Cloud Connect, you've come to the right place. So hold tight. In a few minutes, you'll hear from me again, and we'll get going. Hi, just a quick note again, while we wait for those of you who are looking for the webinar today, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern, hosted by Veeam's partner Webair. You've come to the right place. We're just waiting for everybody in the queue to get logged on, and we'll probably start in just a few minutes, so don't be alarmed by the slightly awkward silence. We'll get going very shortly. Okay. Hello again, everyone. Good morning to you. For those of you who join us, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day. My name is Phil Shee. I'm the founder and managing director of Structure Research. Structure Research is an independent research group focused on the greater infrastructure services ecosystem. We focus on service providers, cloud, data centers, managed hosting services. I'll be your host in the beginning, and I'll pass it on to Sagi Brody, who's the CTO of Webair, and he's going to do a deep dive into the technology. Just a quick housekeeping item before we get before we kick off. We're going to have a raffle. We'll give you some details at the end, but if you want to enter, you'll have to complete the survey, and I think click the yes option to sign up for the webinar email list. And then the prize will be announced next week. Sorry, the winner of the prize will be announced on social media through Webair's properties on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. That'll be May 16th, 9 a.m. Eastern. We'll give you some quick details about, again, at the end of the webinar. So I want to start off with some background. We definitely, in covering the infrastructure services space here in 2019, we found that where we are in terms of this kind of greater migration from on-premise infrastructure to the off-premise or outsourced infrastructure world is definitely not an A to B journey. It's definitely a journey that's taken people, organizations like yours, to very different places. Some of infrastructures, still run on-premise. It also is run in various types of infrastructure deployment environments, co-location, private clouds, hosting facilities, in third-party data centers, as well, of course, hyperscale public clouds. And all these environments, as you're going to hear from Sagi very shortly, are increasingly dependent on each other and intertwined. Thought we'd give you some quick perspective before we dive into the technology on just kind of where we are in 2019, the outsourced infrastructure industry, the off-premise world, roughly 20 years old. In 2019, our data, our research shows that this is roughly a $170 billion industry this year. You can see the growth rates there, and they're trending upwards as we move out to 2023. We could be looking at an industry that's worth roughly 500 billion plus. Now, what this data shows is we're taking that industry, the outsourced infrastructure, and adding it to the value of infrastructure that's run on premise, perhaps in corporate data centers like your own. And when you look at that, the value of that infrastructure, looking at 2019, you see that number is very significant. At over 500 billion, and if we use that same 5-year trajectory going forward, we could be looking at an infrastructure-centric, an infrastructure world that could be worth almost $1 trillion. Just thinking that on a percentage basis, and I think this is a very important trend to think about. If you look at the purple and the percentage there, starting from the left, you'll see that that's trending downward. And that reflects, our research, and it's showing that the on-premise world, while it's still significant today in 2019, is going to continue to trend down as a percentage of the total infrastructure that's run to support the content applications that are out there. And that, of course, is being driven by the movement from on-premise to outsourced, various types of outsourced infrastructure environments, of which, of course, Webair is going to show you one aspect of that today. And this is just kind of showing how that trend on the left, the on-premise world, continues to trend down, and how the outsourced infrastructure combined with all the infrastructure that's out there continues to trend up in terms of value. Just leave you with one last thought. A lot of the outsourced infrastructure, of course, is run by third-party service providers, and third-party service providers, in very stark contrast to how internal IT is run on-premise and in-house and in proprietary environments and facilities. It's certainly a different operating model. I did mention it's about 20 years old, but in that time, in that 20-year process, we've seen MSPs, managed hosting companies, data center operators, edge providers drive, not just bring interesting, an advantageous economic and business model, but also a lot of value for the end users like yourself on this call. These are some of the things, but to highlight, I think the service providers are uniquely positioned because they're agnostic. They operate as a third party. They're technology neutral. They're carrier neutral. They come with a problem-solving mindset. They're there to deal with problems, not just host and manage infrastructure. They deal with customers. They deal with complexity. They provide services. And I think the key point that I'd like to leave you with is that because they're agnostic, because service providers and MSPs deal with multiple customers, they have unique experiences that translate into, unique insight and perspective, and frankly, proficiency. So, repeated trials, have a lot of scale in terms of expertise, in terms of skill sets, in terms of specialization, all which combined, the managed services, the people, the development expertise, combined with the infrastructure operating scale, produces a significant amount of value that's delivered to end users, and you're going to see how that can be done in some of the use cases that Sagi is going to present. With that, I'd like to ask our host to pass along the presentation to our presenter, Sagi Brody.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Thanks for the introduction and all the information you provided. As Phil mentioned, my name is Sagi Brody. I'm the CTO of Webair. I've been with Webair since almost the beginning, almost about 20 years. We're a managed cloud service provider. And what that means is that we deploy and manage infrastructure on behalf of our customers, take full ownership and accountability for it. in a very customized and flexible way. So our services run the gamut of hosting production type workloads, disaster recovery, backups, and then all the complex networking and security requirements that wrap around those. We do have infrastructure and deployments globally, and it's important for many of our larger customers who are seeking sovereignty and locality of their data into various regions to meet with the compliance for ITAR or GDPR or others. And we've been recognized throughout the industry in various reports, such as IDC's, Gartner's Magic Quadrant for disaster recovery as a notable vendor the last 2 years, and as a managed hybrid hosting company as well by them. And today, what we're really talking about is how can Webair and Veeam help you achieve business resilience? And so if you already are running Veeam on-prem and you're using it for your day-to-day backups or maybe some host-to-host replication, how can you leverage that existing investment, all the time you spend standing up the software and configuring it to help you realize resilience in the form of offsite backups or disaster recovery? And when we talk about business resilience today, we're not just talking about copying our data somewhere else. We're not just talking about an IT capability to recover, but business resilience is really becoming a phrase to just explain how a business needs to think of resilience not only as an afterthought for standing up infrastructure, but it has to be part of the conversation before you go and stand up any production infrastructure. How you host, where you host, what SaaS platforms you use, what vendors you work with, you need to look at all of that from the resilience lens right away. And the same is true for your human capital. Admins can be a single point of failure. The decisions that you make today will affect your ability to build a resilient business and platform in the future. And so Veeam, Cloud Connect and Webair can certainly help you. And if you're already running Veeam software, then it's plug and play to some extent, which I'll show you. So we think about resilience from an IT perspective. It certainly is more than just maybe enabling offsite backups through Veeam or replicating host to host. Your IT infrastructure, I'm sure, is very hybrid in a way. It's not just VMware. It's not just Hyper-V. Probably have a good amount of legacy and technical debt, and all that needs to be considered as part of your resiliency plan too. No data mover out there, no single data mover out there is going to cover the gamut of all of that, or even cover direct into VM iSCSI mounts or NFS mounts. How are you going to deal with your voice platforms as part of DR? What are you going to do with your VDI deployments, be it Citrix or Horizon? What about your legacy IBM iSeries or P-Series? So we really need a different strategy and solution for each of those. Veeam is great because it covers maybe 80 or 90% of what's there. But then we also think of the integrations. What about your integrations with your network? Maybe you have a private MPLS. Maybe you have an SD-WAN deployment. Maybe you have private connectivity to a partner like Bloomberg or Charles River or your EMR healthcare provider. So copying the data is sort of the easy part, but integrating with the network security, your MSSPs, that's where resilience becomes more than just disaster recovery. And so we'll talk a little bit about what you can do with Veeam quickly, how we can deal with some of the low-hanging fruit, and then what are the services that take it from replication to a full-on usable disaster recovery and resilience platform. Like Phil mentioned, the definition of production environments is changing too. So to complicate everything that I just showed you, your production environment is maybe not just all at one location with one integration. As CIOs move towards a hybrid deployment, where if you look at this graph here, in 5 years, almost no CIO is saying all their infrastructure is on-prem, and almost no CIO is saying that all their infrastructure is the public cloud. Everyone's acknowledging it's going to be a mixing and matching, essentially placing workloads on the platforms that make sense for their individual requirements, or maybe latency, security, cost. How do you protect that? If your production infrastructure is hybrid, how do you achieve resiliency of that? So Veeam has some capabilities with the hybrid, with the public cloud, and Webair does as well as a service provider. So here's how we can help, with the assumption that you are possibly already a Veeam customer using it day to day or are considering it. If you have Veeam installed already, you can interface with Webair very easily, and I'll show you that in a minute, to achieve immediate offsite backups and disaster recovery capabilities for your production environments. So through the simple integration, you should be able to achieve the immediate capability to have long-term data retention of your backups. And so maybe you build a strategy where you're only keeping maybe 2 or 3 months of on-site backups. You don't have to keep buying more hardware, and you can start shipping backups off-site and checking the box that your data is not all at one location, that you do have offsite backups, that you're keeping your data for 7 years, like you might need to. Having the regulatory requirements around that offsite backups, having the encryption requirements, having the SOC 2, the HIPAA, the CGIS, the FISMA. If you have a requirement around a RTO, RPO for DR, once you integrate, you'll be able to achieve that relatively quickly as well. And you can shift accountability for all these things to a vendor. You never have to buy hardware or software. You don't have to take ownership of the monitoring or the managing. And so the way it gets done is we would provide you with credentials for an account on our side. You'd log into your Veeam backup and replication interface. Most likely, this is the interface that you use every day to manage your on-site local backups and restores. And you would just add a service provider, put in those credentials, and immediately Veeam will now detect the Webair side, be it Webair's East Coast, West Coast, Canadian, multiple European data centers, Asian, wherever you need the data to locate. You will now see that location as part of your local Veeam infrastructure. You'll see a new repo, it'll be called a cloud repo, that'll present itself as maybe 100 terabytes, which you don't have to commit to. It's just based on consumption. And you'll see a new host where you can replicate your VMs to. And so after that, the way that you get the data to us falls in line with the paradigm that you're already using for all of your local backups and replication. So now you can build backup jobs or backup copy jobs to our side, and stipulate how often. You can enable a GFS retention to basically say, I want my backups to go to Webair daily. I want them to keep my daily backups for a week. I want them to keep weeklies for a month, monthlies for a year, and yearlies for 7 years or so on. You get to manage all that, and that's all done through synthetic operations with incrementals. So the bandwidth utilization is low, it's compressed, dedupe, and it's all sent over the wire. And so that can all be built very easily from your existing Veeam interface. You can also encrypt the data with your own passwords. So if anyone accesses the backups from our side or third parties, they wouldn't be able to access them without your password. And if you're concerned with the amount of network bandwidth over the wire, you can set a schedule to dictate that you only want the backup set or the replication set to our side off hours. So this is all done within the Veeam software that you're using today already, or you're considering using. Once that's in place, the restoration method is exactly the same as you would restore local backups. When you go to view a VM from the Veeam console, which we have here, you'll see not only all of your local retention points, but everything from the Webair side as well. And should you need to perform a restore, a file level restore, a database, or a full VM image, you can do that from our side the same way that you do it today. And so the idea is to give you this immediate offsite backup capability, get rid of the headaches of the storage or of needing to store your data in multiple locations, and not change anything for you from an operational perspective or from a technology perspective. And the same reports and monitoring tools that you use today will remain. So the same is true for replication. Once you make the connection to Webair, you can start replicating VMs, real-time replication down to 15 minutes, to our side, the same way you would select host-to-host replication. And once those are in place, you'll be able to see those and initiate failovers in both directions as well. Now you might ask, that's great, but what happens if my site's down? If I can't access my local backup server, how do I deal with managing what's offsite? So everything that's sent to Webair is manageable through our portal, which we have here. And you can spin up a backup replication server on our side and start ingesting all the backups and start performing restores. And if your site's down, obviously you need a way to fail over to the DR site, which we provide, which can be done through the portal as well. And so from our portal, you get to manage your offsite backup, NDR. So here we can see the various repos that we provided the last time a backup was successful. So that's data that's actually coming from your Veeam on-prem. The number of VMs that we're storing and the amount of storage that you're consuming. And you'll be able to actually drill down and see successful and failed backups. Look at the retention points for all the backups from our side as well as see all of the virtual machines that are being backed up. We're also pulling all the alerting from your local Veeam instance too. So if there are any failures with backups or replications coming to us, we are immediately notified, and we will reach out to you and open a ticket and investigate what's going on. The same is true for your local jobs. So should you have local job failures, we will actually be able to detect those and let you know that there is a local failure. So now you might also have a need where you want to use this capability, but you have multiple divisions in your organization. You don't want your various divisions to see each other's backups. So from our portal, you can actually go and subdivide the account, build separate login and passwords, and provide those credentials to all of your sub orgs, and then they can plug that into Veeam, and they'll only be able to back up to their own cloud repos. The portal will only show them their components as well, and you can set quotas too. So now during a DR event, you obviously need a capability to fail over. So even though we are providing a fully managed service, meaning if you have an event where you need to fail over, all you really have to do is call us. There is still full self-service capability. So from our portal, you can log in. You can see all the failover plans that are replicating. You can actually drill down and see the historical storage utilization of all the disaster recovery failover plans. And from the portal, you can actually hit the button and fail over to our side. So we are providing all of the CPU, memory, and disk infrastructure as a service. So your VMs are replicating to production grade SAN, SLA based, providing over 1,000 IOPS per terabyte. And all of the enterprise level compute network infrastructure is provided as part of the service. You can log into the portal, start a failover. The VMs will boot up immediately, and from here you can actually see them. If you got hit with a ransomware, let's say on a Friday, and you need to fail over, and the ransomware is already replicated over, from the portal you can actually select an older restore point and boot up from there. So if you set a journal of 3 days, you can literally hit the rewind button and boot up from right before you got hit. And this is all using the existing Veeam replication technology. Once you fell over, if you're finding that the VMs don't have enough horsepower, you can just log in and dial up from maybe 4 CPUs to 8 or increase the memory. And you can even console the VMs on the DR side too. And so the idea is to give you a solution that looks and feels and acts like what you're using today. The IPs will remain the same. The networking stays the same, which I'll show you in a minute. And it's all being done through that existing paradigm of replication that you have up and running. So you really have two options here. Webair is providing a fully managed solution, which I'll go over the details. But it doesn't preclude you from standing up your own Veeam infrastructure, maybe on a public cloud, running all of the BNR servers and the repos and Sober and all the different components, and setting this up yourself. And so, really the way to answer that question is to understand what is your appetite for ownership and accountability of all of this. Who do you want to be accountable for data breach of your offsite data backups? What about compliance? Who's taking ownership of that? If you're using a service provider, obviously they need to provide you with the same level of compliance and assurance that you're beholden to. And so depending on the infrastructure platform that you use, they might only provide you with physical security assurances. They might not be providing full ownership and accountability for the networking and everything of the entire stack. The other thing is, who do you want to be accountable for the performance of this? If you set this up and manually in-house and maybe forgot to configure the backups, and the backups are missing, what is the recourse? Well, maybe you fire someone, but your backups are still gone. If you use a service provider, you will have, a legal remedy. You'll have contracts. You'll have monies paid out as a recourse, and that's going to be based on SLAs. If you're provided with a disaster recovery SLA of 1 hour and it doesn't meet it, then the service provider, Webair in our case, is on the hook for that. And then more importantly, who do you want to take ownership of fail over to DR, of fail back from DR and to test? And so with a fully managed solution, you're shifting ownership and accountability for all that to us. And obviously we're providing all of the hardware, software, infrastructure, and networking as part of this solution. So when you are consuming backups as a service, we basically provide you those credentials, you plug it into Veeam, and now immediately your data is coming over to our side. We only bill based on the storage that you're consuming. So there's no metrics for how much does it cost to transfer data to us, how much does it cost to transfer data back, what about gets and puts and operations. Everything is consolidated all into one simple metric of the amount of data that you're storing. And it is a fully managed service. So we're providing that 24/7 monitoring of your offsite backups. We're actually providing monitoring of your local infrastructure too with Veeam once the connection is made, and we can let you know when we see errors. And the idea is it's a fully managed service, 15-minute response time SLA via phone or live chat, with all of the compliance, which I'll show you in a minute as well. And so that's the backups as a service. We also are providing this for the hybrid platforms, like I mentioned before. So if your critical data is in Office 365 or OneDrive or SharePoint, all that data can come to us as well and share that same storage allocation and bucket. When you look at disaster recovery as a service, it's the same thing. We're only charging you based on the storage you're consuming and the amount of VMs that you're replicating. It is a fully managed service. So even though you can log into the portal at any time and self-serve boot up, fail over, you can call us and say, hey, we're having an issue. We need to fail over right now. So what we're providing with that simple metric, billing metric, is everything related to onboarding, meaning creating the runbook, owning the failover, failback, quarterly managed testing for a week, and we actually let you use the recovery infrastructure for 3 days out of every month at no additional cost. And so we encourage you to log on to the DR site, spin up your VMs, and use it. Use it for your QA testing, for your development testing. If you are running security scans, asset scan, penetration test, vulnerability scans, then scan against the replica. You have a copy of your most critical data, and by running the scans there, you can reduce exposure of your production infrastructure to security events, maybe from just once or twice a year with your testing to maybe weeks. So this is a fully managed solution, and then we get into the weeds on all the things I showed you at the beginning. The always-on networking, the always-on VPN, the BGP integration, the MPLS integration. We will advocate running your Active Directory or authentication always-on. We provide application-based replication too. So for SQL clusters, it might be more advantageous to run it as a cluster so that we can achieve partial infrastructure failover. We also provide disaster recovery for other platforms, such as the IBM, iSeries, and P-Series platforms, and we provide native storage replication, maybe for Nimble or VNX or Isilon, because there are ultimately platforms that Veeam doesn't cover, but we're providing a disaster recovery as a service, which is going to be fully inclusive. So whatever you have at production, whatever your technical debt and legacy environment looks like, we'll have a solution so you're 100% covered for DR. From a security perspective, anything that you replicate through Veeam to us will fall under our SOC 2 audit. We will provide assurances for GDPR through a DPA, for HIPAA compliance, CGIS, FISMA, and provide you with a business associate agreement taking legal liability of all of your data. And so we are doing this today for various organizations for ITAR compliance, healthcare compliance, and all that. The other thing which I wanted to mention on this webinar was what the kind of future looks like. So the network is the most critical component of DR. Copying your data offsite, that's the easy part. A lot of people want to get that box checked, but you don't have a full disaster recovery capability until you can fail over and provide the applications to your end users in a way that's consumable as production was. So in the future, what we're doing is moving towards more software-defined workload mobility, meaning the ability to fail over applications from one place to the other without touching the network, without changing DNS, or having to involve networking teams to the extent that they need to be done today. The way that we're doing that is with integrating into security tools. So endpoint security tools such as AppGate, Zero Trust security tools, they provide us with the ability to notify your entire organization that a workload has been moved and to tell all your endpoint devices to go and consume an application from the recovery site instead of production. And that all gets done without involving the network at all with a simple software-defined policy. And so now we can skip the network, skip all of the blockers that are typically in place today, preventing us from true DR. We're also doing the same with software-defined interconnection fabrics. These are companies which are virtualizing the physical meet-me room, and they provide us with the ability to drop connectivity to wherever your production workloads are today. If you're in an Equinix data center or Digital Realty, we can drop a cable today immediately and use it for your replication traffic, keep it away from the internet, maybe air gap it from the public internet, and we can increase the size of that link from maybe 1 gigs and 10 gigs instantly via APIs during a DR event. So these new software-defined technologies, coupled with a true disaster recovery solution, really kind of take it to the next level. The last point I wanted to make is, like Phil mentioned at the beginning, it is going hybrid. And you might be thinking that you want to go hybrid, you want to go multi-cloud, you want to go edge, but you just don't know how to get from point A to point B. So disaster recovery is really one of those great stepping stones to getting you to hybrid. And we notice the industry, a lot of our end users are sort of looking at the world in a very polarized way. Infrastructure is either on-prem in their closet or it's in a public cloud, each with their own pros and cons, and they're just kind of stuck in paralysis by analysis. So there definitely is a better way, and DR can get you there. And one of the ways that we integrate not only our DR solutions, but our production cloud solutions is by providing private connectivity from your IT organizations to our regional cloud infrastructures and giving you cloud services, production or DR, that are low latency or far away for DR, that are privately connected behind the firewall and should look and feel and act like they're part of your IT organization. You should not have to compromise on your existing network or security paradigms for a proper hosted private cloud or disaster recovery infrastructure. We have customers that tell us, hey, we can't use disaster recovery. We can't use public cloud because we're a law enforcement organization and evidence can't cross state lines. So with this type of edge compute model for the enterprise, we can provide you with full-on DR, full-on hosted infrastructure, and not break your mold. It can be within the state, it can be within the country, with guarantees for US persons for compliance, and it can be privately connected so it looks and feels like it's part of your local environment. So there's a ton of options between just the black and white on-prem and public cloud world. And if you're a large mid to large enterprise and you have a good amount of IT, you're going to need that. A cookie cutter solution is not going to work. You need extreme flexibility for your cloud and DR integrations, and that's where we go deep on the networking. I'll show you two quick case studies. Here's a DR implementation that we did for one of the top 100 law firms in the world. Again, and not cookie cutter. It was replication. So a data mover like Veeam, replication for hundreds of VMs and petabytes of data. But then there's a lot more to proper DR. It was co-location at the DR site for some legacy platforms. It was running their SD-WAN at the DR site, the always-on authentication, their wiretapping infrastructure at DR, SQL servers, and through it was NetApp replication with SnapMirror, and it was Nimble replication as well. And so you might ask, why did we need all that? Well, because their environment was complex, and as it indicates in the last bullet, we provided them with their first successful DR test that they ever had previously. Here's one that we're doing for a Fortune 500 company. It is a global deployment, so they have offices throughout the world, and they need data not only to stay in the same country as where it came from, the source country, but they need assurance that whatever long-term archival data that they send to us, that it's being stored at 2 separate locations within each source country. So we're doing that for them, for the entire organization, thousands of VMs, long-term backups, NDR. We have to integrate with their global, with their global MPLS network, provide a privately encrypted network for them on the back end as well. And then provide a ton of compliances and assurances for their auditors. So again, we're talking about disaster recovery as a service. We're talking about replicating with Veeam, but a true solution is going to touch on all these other ancillary components. A lot of them having to do with networking, security, always on workloads, and just managed services. So I think the takeaway from all this is, I know that we went over a lot, but the action plan should be figure out what do you actually need to protect. For many organizations, offsite backups is sort of required now for the entire gamut of their infrastructure. And then we can protect, maybe some of the VMs, infrastructure, physical servers don't need any DR capabilities. Maybe some of them need a 24-hour RTO, RPO, and we actually offer multiple tiers. So we have a 6-hour RTO, we have a 15-minute, we have a 24-hour, and so figure out what your appetite is for downtime for all your various applications. And once you've modeled that and you understand what you want to achieve, then figure out, is it something that you want to do yourself? Do you want to stand up all the infrastructure, maybe set up a colo? Do you want to run it all yourself on a public cloud and take ownership? Or are you looking to outsource some of it or all of it? And we've done hybrid deployments where maybe a customer already owns all their own storage, but they don't want to forego it. So we let them colo at our DR sites, and we'll own all the replication, but we'll use their storage. And so talk about hybrid, there's a tremendous amount of hybrid options for true DR. And so figure out what do you want to protect, what are the RPOs, and would it be painful to get rid of some of the investments that you've made? And then we can find a way to make it all work together. So Phil, I'll pass it back over to you. I know that you had some questions or wanted to engage the audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the very detailed and thorough presentation. I have a few quick questions, but before we jump into that, I thought it might Jeff definitely mentioned, I mentioned in my opening comments talking about independent and technology agnostic service providers and MSPs, and they're able to work with best of breed technologies and select, work with companies that have, an understanding and a history with service providers, and Veeam is that kind of company. Just some quick data points to share with the audience. Veeam brought in, I think, in 2018, brought in close to $1 billion in revenue. I think 936 was the number, and that represented 16% year-over-year growth. Veeam, just so you know, is 100% focused on this model, working with service providers like Webair. It's 100% channel focused, and it has an ecosystem of partners that spreads around the world. And I think numbers just over 51,000. So just to give you a sense of the scope of the work Veeam has done with the service provider community and how they value the expertise and experience that service providers bring to the table when it comes to this kind of technology. So, Sagi, just wanted to jump into a few questions. I think you touched on this in listening to this, that a lot of this sounds great, but there are hidden fees and unexpected things, costs when it comes to moving to the cloud. Maybe talk about some of the costs involved and maybe point specifically to where you can see some of your customers running into potential kind of gotchas or again, those unexpected things and how you've helped them deal with it.
Yeah, so in general, and I put this diagram back up on the screen here, is you mentioned being agnostic, and so Webair definitely sees we see ourselves as a vendor neutral, platform neutral party. We have your data's best interest at heart, and we want to help you build a reference architecture so that you can place data and workloads in different platforms depending on the unique requirements. So if someone asks us, well, which cloud is better than the other, it's never a question that can be asked. We need to push back and say, what's the workload? and what are the requirements of the workload. And so when we build infrastructure integrations for our customers like this, we actually encourage them to use public clouds like AWS and Azure where they're appropriate. If you're building a native DevOps tool, AWS makes sense. If you want to leverage Azure credits, then let's do that. And the ways that we can help do that are by, through the lens of offsite backups and DR, is by tiering. So think of us as maybe a landing zone for your immediate spin-up capability, and then maybe leverage public cloud on the back end for cold storage. And we can actually build all that and help you with all that. But kind of going back to the, use a company like us or build it yourself, there are definitely a lot of gotchas. When you're spinning up infrastructure on public cloud, even if it's just storage, there are a tremendous amount of metrics by which you get built, because those companies, the hyperscale public clouds have no choice, but they have to build on those metrics because it is at such a large scale. What we've tried to do, because we mostly work with sort of mid-market enterprise organizations, is pare down the metrics by which we build to the least amount possible, so that our customers have a predictable billing model for now and in the future, and they can put it into a budget for the next year or 2 years or 3 years, and not have any gotchas at all. And so all of the technical support, all the management and accountability and service is all bundled into this simple cost metric of maybe a per gig per month basis. We also work with a lot of companies that are state owned. And so Webair is on state contract for all of the services that we mentioned. And so for going through sort of these traditional procurement models and providing SKUs, we have to make it simple. We can't have a surprise appear on someone's bill. And so we stand behind all that. And if we miss something on our SOW, then it's on us to resolve it on our dime. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think the takeaway is it's not a one size fits all model or proposition. I mean, just in listening to your presentation, I mean, it's multiple scenarios and multiple requirements. I think some of the end users on this call probably come from larger organizations who have complex security and network and compliance requirements. Maybe talk through, how you deal with them, and maybe some data points from your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, that's so that's definitely a good use case for us, because we're all about flexibility and customization. The fact that Webair owns its own data centers is providing connectivity literally to our customer's doorstep, dropping 10 gig or 100 gig or MPLS tie-in right to the end user. And the fact that we own all the hardware, all the cloud infrastructure that we're managing, means that we can take full ownership and accountability for the entire stack. When we sign a BAA, it's fully inclusive of all that. It's not just a sort of a superficial SOC that says, hey, if someone breaks into our data center and steals a disk, it's on us. So because we own the entire stack to the end user, because we're owning encryption to their doorstep, in transit, at rest, and physical security, it gives our customers assurances from a security perspective that we can meet their requirements. And to the extent that they need something customized, we can customize. So we can air gap their infrastructure from the public internet. We can provide single tenant deployments. They can own the encryption keys at rest on our side, so that we're not even a party to the data. And we do this for many large organizations and companies, healthcare organizations, for the government. We have some customers that require third parties to securely have back-end connections to do monitoring and all that. And we also are not trying to become a security company. You'll notice a lot of MSPs and CSPs in the market are trying to become a me too with, hey, we do security. So like I mentioned before, the fact that we're vendor neutral means security too. And so we really see security as a standalone service. And so if you're already engaged with an MSSP for security services, we built our platforms so that you can keep using them for DR. They can deploy all of their security infrastructure in front, side by side, the DR replica, because if you have a copy of all your most critical data somewhere, definitely need to protect it. And if you have a security vendor and they're a good security vendor, they should be raising their hand and say, hey, we need to protect that too. So we certainly encourage that and work with our customers, MSPs and MSSPs, so that we don't break the mold for what they're doing today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great points. So you mentioned in your presentation, you mentioned other platforms in addition to virtual and x86 x86-based hardware. Other platforms like IBM or Direct Storage, which I don't think Veeam protects today. But if you were to speak to customers with those, investments in that kind of technology, how are you accomplishing resilience of those platforms, and how does that play in with investments that they may have already made? How do you deal with those issues when approaching those customers?
Okay, good question. So like I said before, we're definitely a service provider. We're not here to sell our customers software. We're here to sell a solution, and the solution is going to be dictated based on what the environment looks like. And so the beauty is if you're already running Veeam and you're using it today locally, the integration with us for offsite backups and DR is super simple. And we can do POCs, and we can be up and running in minutes, and you can actually start testing it. And so we advocate using Veeam for x86 platforms, so for VMware, Hyper-V, and we use Veeam as well for physical servers for offsite backups and DR. So for physical Linux and Windows boxes. So if you have Veeam, all of those are easily covered. But for the other platforms where the Veeam cannot cover, yeah, we do have many other tools that will cover those. So if it's IBM platforms, we'll use other data movers to replicate those. If you're running DFS, we can use DFS replication, and ultimately, if there's no other choice but storage native replication, so like running SnapMirror or VNX replication or Isilon, whatever the gamut may be, we support those. And we support those because we've been in sort of the production hosting space for almost 20 years. We host production critical workloads for over 10,000 customers. So we have all those platforms, not just for the replication, but those are running production workload setting in a multi-tenant fashion. So the message is really, whatever you have, whatever's on the same local LAN of production, we'll find a way to build you a DR solution. If you have a direct connect to AWS in production, we can do it at DR. And that's why we say it is complex. It's not, again, not cookie cutter.
Okay. So we understand that Veeam can send backup data directly to AWS, Azure, the public clouds, at least in this recent version. Can you maybe elaborate and just explain that capability, but also parse out how it differs from kind of the approach that and the approach and customization that Webair is proposing and bringing to the table?
Yeah, that's correct. So in the latest version of Veeam, so 9.5 U4, they released the ability to tier backup data to public S3. So what that is, and so the first thing is you need to be running Enterprise or Enterprise Plus, and you need to be using Sober on-site. And basically this will consume one of your Sober repos. And so if you're running more than one Sober repo, more than two, if you're running more than one, you need Enterprise Plus to utilize the capability. But if you have all that, you can essentially build a policy to send older backup data to the public cloud, to like S3. So it cannot go to Glacier or Deep Archive. It can go to S3 or Azure Blob. And so it is a great capability. And for people that are sort of willing to take ownership and accountability of all those technical sort of requirements and managing security and compliance on the public side, I think it makes a lot of sense. And so Webair, what we're doing is we're rolling all that into our service. And so we will do that as a backend. So if you look at this diagram, if you look at like the bottom right is sort of the Webair landing zone, we'll go and integrate all of the backend public cloud if it's something that you want to use and provide it as part of our service so that you have an immediate spin up capability and you have less expensive storage for archival. But more importantly, it'll all be wrapped under our compliance, data protection and accountability and 24/7 managed service and part of that simple monthly billing metric. So that again, there's no surprises.
Great insights. Maybe just time for just one more question again on the public cloud, which I know it's on everybody's mind. Disaster recovery as a service, I guess it can be overwhelming. It's a big undertaking. You've talked about so many of the nuts and bolts and the questions that have to be answered. What would you say to those who perhaps would be a little just cynical or would say, hey, wouldn't it be just easier to move my workloads to the public cloud? Why do I need to do all this? How would you approach that kind of question from an end user?
Well, I mean, I think that it's definitely a valid point, but I would really question, what are you moving? Moving workloads to the public cloud makes a lot of sense. And when you start looking at where to move, if you want to move workloads offsite, where do you want to move them to? And like I said before, there is a great platform target for your workloads depending on what their requirements are. So if you're just moving perpetual VMs, if you have lots of VMs, let's say on VMware or Hyper-V or physical boxes, and you just, and like many of our customers say, many hospitals say to us, hey, get this stuff out of here. I don't want this on-prem. I don't want to be held liable. I don't want to be accountable. Get it out of here. So if you're looking to move it off-site, if they're just perpetual VMs, the public cloud is not necessarily going to be the best sort of destination. So we also provide hosted private cloud. So if you look at that diagram, the bottom right, it's a hosted private cloud where we'll give you, let's say, a VMware cluster as a service. So it's vCenter access like you're used to. It's all the hardware, software, VMware, Microsoft licensing, all the management, monitoring, security, and scaling, all rolled into one simple monthly fee with no surprises. Privately connected to your local environment, same IP address, the same VMs. And now the oversubscription benefit that you're used to, the ability to spin up maybe 500 VMs and only consume 30 gigahertz of CPU and 100 gigs of memory, you'll still have all that oversubscription benefit. But you've moved everything offsite. And so what we try to do on the production side is give you the best of both worlds between on-prem and public cloud. And then we'll interconnect the public cloud on the back end and provide it to you as part of the connection that we make, so that for workloads that do make sense in the public cloud, put them there. So if you're just moving perpetual VMs, hosted private cloud is going to be less expensive, and you'll get a lot more management and accountability from a provider like us. If you're building a cloud native DevOps tool and you want to use PaaS, AWS, Azure, all day, every day. If you have Azure credits and you want to make use of them, depending on what you're trying to do, I would use that as well. And so the idea is build a reference architecture like this that allows you to mix and match and use all of them at the same time, but all wrapped within the same security and network paradigm. Sorry if it was a little long, but we're pretty passionate about this.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I would leave with the last word, saying, reiterating that there's so many questions to be asked, and that's what service providers are there for. These are questions you've thought of many times. You've seen a lot of test cases, and you have experiences to draw from that. So, thanks, Sagi, for everything, for all the insights. We're running up to the top of the hour. I appreciate the audience for sticking with us, and hopefully you've got a lot of value out of everything today. It's just the last item is I did promise in the beginning to mention what the prize was, and I'll reiterate how you can go about trying to win that prize. So it's an Amazon Fire TV Cube with hands-free Alexa and 4K Ultra HD. The winner will be announced on Webair's social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. The date and time again is May 16th. I believe that's next Thursday, 9 a.m. In the Eastern time zone is when that winner will be announced. Now, eligibility, how do you do it? So in order to win the prize, attendees will want to complete the survey that they will receive in the follow-up email, and that will automatically enter you in the draw to win this prize. I believe, and you also have to select the yes option in the survey question that allows you to receive continued communication from Webair. So again, appreciate the time. Sagi, thanks for making the time. I know you've had a busy day there as well. And certainly encourage any of the audience not just to fill out the survey, but to interact with Webair if you have more questions and follow-ups. The team is definitely passionate. I've known them for many years and know that they're very passionate about the subject, and I think that Sagi gives you that sense very clearly. So hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Sagi, maybe if there's anything else you want to say, I'll let you say it before we sign off.
Yeah, like you said, feel free to contact Webair. We're more than happy to jump on calls, myself included, and just review your environment and show you what those diagrams would look like for you, how that reference architecture would show up for your environment. Be happy to do that.
Great, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. And again, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to join us.
Thank you.